JAWLS for the NES, developed by Western Bit Entertainment and released in November of 1987 by LJN, maker of toys. You might be somewhat familiar with those folks. The general idea behind JAWS is simple. Guide your boat around the ocean until you hit something. What that something is, nobody knows, but somebody does care because they send a lone diver to check it out. And this is the main meat of the game. Killing innocent sea life while collecting conch shells to trade at a port for a receiver to track down JAWS, as well as incremental upgrades to your weapon to deliver more damage. It's about as exciting as it sounds. LJN branded video games have something of a reputation for questionable quality control, although there are a few games that are actually quite decent and can even be considered good underrated titles. JAWS is not one of those games. The gameplay in general is pretty repetitive. Yeah, sure, lots of games are repetitive, but lots of good games have some element to it that makes them fun to play. JAWS does not. The problem with JAWS is that for better or worse, the gameplay doesn't really change all that much. You hit something, dive into the water, shoot the same jellyfish, stingrays, and other assorted sea life over and over again. After a while, you're back on the boat, and you repeat the whole process all over again. You hit something, you kill more sea life, and it's not at all exciting. It gets boring, and after a while, you start to doze off. I guess that's what the game counts on to contribute to the overall difficulty of the game, as the enemies in this game are so easy to sidestep that losing focus and falling asleep are pretty much the only ways to run into an enemy. Even the sea map segments where you're riding your boat around is rather pointless, as you're merely going back and forth between the two ports to trade those shells in for additional power. There's not really much else to do beyond this. There's not much in terms of exploration. It's go to this port, go to that port. Ugh, who cares? Every so often you'll come face to face with JAWS, who will take a million hits to die, and is about as much of a non-threat as anything else in this game. And the kicker is that if you don't kill off JAWS within the time allotted, he'll gradually restore a chunk of his health meter for each round you don't kill him off. So in essence, if you take a dive for a couple rounds and you don't encounter JAWS, he'll be fully healed and you'll have to start dwindling that health bar back to nothing all over again. Lame. If you do manage to drain his life meter to 0, you still have this first-person final battle where you use a strobe to stab JAWS in the heart, and that ends the game. If you miss all your strobes, you'll go back to the map, you have to start the whole thing all over again. It's a nice concept, but the execution's worthless. Timing's hard to get down, and sometimes the hit detection's a bit wonky. If this is supposed to make the gameplay more interesting and varied, it's 0 for 2 on that count. Control-wise, controlling your boat's simple enough, you're just moving around with a D-pad. Controlling your diver's simple enough as well. D-pad to move around, a button to shoot. Yippee! You have to take momentum into account when you're swimming, but moving around isn't really an issue with JAWS. Rather, it's staying awake that's really the problem here. For a game made in 1987, JAWS looks rather meh. The map screen looks okay, if somewhat bland. The diving sequences are pretty average looking, sprites are pretty small, and JAWS himself is nothing more than a bigger shark and doesn't look all that imposing. It's not great, but it's not bad, it's sorta just there. The same could be said for the music in JAWS. Aside from a none too thrilling rendition of the JAWS theme on the title screen, the rest of the game's musical compositions are pretty substandard stuff, unmemorable track that isn't all that great. Sound effects are also rather meh. Actually, just like everything else in this game, it's just a big ball of meh. On a whole, JAWS is a rather inoffensive but ultimately worthless game. The fact that it's based on the 4th JAWS film is really irrelevant because with a bit of effort, you can make a decent game out of a somewhat mediocre movie. But JAWS doesn't really do that. It's playable and functional to a point, but doesn't give you much of a reason to give it anything more than a quick playthrough to try it out and put it aside afterwards. All in all, it's not one of the worst games in the NES library, and certainly not one of the worst games to bear the Rainbow of Death, but outside of extremely mild curiosity, there's really no point in playing this game for any extended period of time. It's sorta just there, so just leave it be and move on to something else. Anything else would be a lot better.